What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Body Lock. It's your man, Ant Walker, joined here by Pat OJ and the latest addition to the Body Lock team, Matt Wells. Happy that you could be joining us, Matt. Both good friends of mine, so I'm happy to see this trio put together here. So we got some things to talk about. First off, our mornings, it's Monday morning, Labor Day, we're recording this. Our Monday started off with the news that looks like Nick Diaz might actually be coming back to competition after years and years away from the cage. We haven't seen him since UFC 183 against Anderson Silva. So now the talk has begun, and we kind of have these Nick Diaz talks every so often, but are we feeling it this time? Do we believe that Nick Diaz is really coming back? Pat, I'll start with you.
You know, I don't think he's really coming back personally. I think that he is honestly, I mean, we've done this in 2017. We did this in 2018, 2019. I don't see enough there. It's great he did a test cut, but he still has to get through USADA. Remember, he had that whereabouts failure for not showing up. I don't know what those ramifications are. He's still going to have to be tested by USADA. He's still going to have to actually show up to the cage on paper. I don't know. I don't see it. It's too crazy right now in the pandemic to say that he won't for sure, especially if the UFC is hurting for extra fighters. But personally, I don't think he's going to actually make it to the cage unless they pay him a ridiculous amount of money. And I can't see the UFC doing that at the moment. So personally, my vote is he will not make it to the cage in 2020.
All right, Matt, what's your thoughts on this? Do you think Nick Diaz makes that early 2021 return like his manager is saying he will?
Yeah, I could see him coming back early next year because it's been so long for him. But to come back in 2020 when this random video surfaces on the internet, I think that's just kind of trying to kick the tires a little bit, see where the interest is at, see where his interest is at after seeing the reaction to it. I could see him coming back early 2021. But the interesting thing is, Nick Diaz is a draw, right? So he's the type of guy that you would want to have a crowd for, have a live gate for. Obviously, him being on a pay-per-view card would influence some buys, but it'd be interesting to see a big name, a quote-unquote big name like Nick Diaz return with no audience.
Yeah, it's a good point there. Nick Diaz is definitely someone who considered a fan favorite for sure, and you'd imagine a live crowd would be pretty enthusiastic to see him in his return. I mean, I guess the next question should be, do we want to see him back? And I asked that for a couple of reasons. Like, despite the fan favorite status, despite a very action-friendly style, he's someone who hasn't shown a lot of success in his last several outings. I mean, his last victory, I believe, was against BJ Penn, if I'm not mistaken, on a UFC on Fox card. So it's kind of like, what do we want to see him do at this point? Because we're probably not talking about any sort of contendership, at least yet. I mean, he'd have to come back and prove himself against somebody. You look at some of the names that would be worthy of fighting him on paper, and they're probably not going to be the most competitive matchups simply because they've been active and he hasn't. Also, let's factor in the health state that he's been in. I don't want to reveal exactly everything that I've heard, some things I've heard off record, but I think it's not the best kept secret that Nick Diaz hasn't necessarily been taking care of himself from a physical standpoint since his departure from the UFC. We've seen videos of him just trash drunk at a club in Vegas, bloated, gaining weight and whatnot, and looking the exact opposite of a professional athlete. So do you want to see Nick Diaz come back? Where are your feelings on this, gentleman?
I mean, I guess personally, I am fine having him come back for, say, a fun fight. I'm trying to think exactly who. I mean, honestly, I love the idea of Mike Perry and Nick Diaz fighting. I think that'd be one of the funniest matchups you could possibly make. I'd love to see him, come back against an unranked guy that it makes sense. Maybe Robbie Lawler. I think that's a great fight, especially with Robbie Lawler, losing to Magny recently. He's kind of looks like Lawler's at the tail end of his career. I think that would be a matchup everybody would thoroughly enjoy, that rematch. So for me, a fun fight like that, sure, go ahead and bring him back. Let's do that. But to throw him into title contention or anyone in the top 10, probably even top 15, I think is just, I don't know who you give him that wouldn't absolutely dominate him, especially with that much, cage rust. Whether or not that affects him, I think it probably would. But let's say it doesn't. Again, like you said, he hasn't been taking care of his body. He hasn't been necessarily healthy from what we've just seen publicly. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? I don't think you throw him in there against any of the top 15. I know Wonder Boy said he'd love to fight him. I think that's a terrible idea. That's just, I get why Wonder Boy would say that. It's a big name, and that's just easy for him. But I think, that's an awful idea for Diaz to come back and fight somebody of that caliber right now. Give him a fun fight. Give him somebody like a Lawler or a Mike Perry. I'm all about that. Otherwise, I say no thanks.
Matt, where do you stand on this? Do you want him back? And if so, who would you like to see him compete against?
I only want to see Nick Diaz back if it means that he is going to be taking care of himself in a good fashion again, to where he's got to watch his diet, watch his activities in the club. Just so, if it's a healthy move for him, then good. I mean, of course, it's kind of funny to say, it's a healthy thing to get in a cage and fight, but you kind of get the idea. It's better than going out there and getting drunk, blackout drunk every night, per his Instagram stories. But I would like to agree with Pat, man. There's no reason for anybody to expect him to come into any type of contendership fight or even fight any contender, unless if somebody, gets in Dana's ear and is like, look, this is a money fight. I want the money fight. And if they start pushing that angle, then yeah, you might get a bigger name than he really deserves at this point. Because I mean, his last 3 losses, Condit, GSP, and Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva is now a no contest, but we all saw the fight. He lost it. We saw it happen in front of our eyes. So yes, give him fun fights. He is one of those guys right now where he's kind of a novelty act, and so to speak. Like, I'm done with any support of any talk of putting guys that come back like a Brock Lesnar after 10 years and talking about title picture. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me when guys have been putting in the work, grinding their asses off every single day. So come back, sure. Title picture, heck no. Nope.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you said right there. I mean, Nick Diaz is sort of a legacy act at this point. You got to have a legacy name against him, and but I like your idea, Pat, about a Mike Perry fight. That's one that, from a stylistic standpoint, makes a lot of sense. Mike Perry, as very well noted, is not the sharpest tool out there, so you can't expect him to come out there with any real strategy. He'd just go out there and just be a knucklehead, and knuckleheads will collide, and that's fine. But like, even Robbie Lawler, a rematch that we've wanted to see for a very long time, that kind of loses its luster to me now. That's on the better side of, if you gave him anyone that's really in the top 15 at welterweight, Robbie Lawler at 15 is the only fight that I would not immediately just dismiss as a total sham at this point. So, but still, that doesn't quite have the feel that it would have had, say, 4 or 5 years ago. So at this point, I don't know what they want to do. Nick Diaz also he has this dangerous position now where he is such a big name. He's such a big fan favorite that and he's going to demand such a high paycheck that you're probably not going to see him against, Joseph Smith, who just got in from the Contender Series. You're not going to see that. However, a more fitting competitive matchup that would be. You're very likely to see him against a Jorge Masvidal, which is something that was teased, I believe, last summer or spring. That was a fight that was supposedly on the docket that got scrapped at some point. And if you imagine how that fight would go, that's probably what it looks like against everyone in the top 15 right now for Nick Diaz. So at the very least, if this is going to be a real run, we got to have a showcase fight first. However, name value wise, it may not align to what Nick Diaz is capable of from a box office standpoint. No. So any other thoughts you want to throw at me on this one before we move on, fellas?
I mean, there's just a couple of, fun things that they can do. Obviously, with the Diaz name, they could throw Nate on a card together. They could do a lot of things to sell a card. when there's no crowd. I mean, that's just really the big thing for me. It's like, how are you going to make it make sense for the UFC as a business and make it make sense for Nick, who wants to come back? And obviously, we all know he wants to get paid. And does he still believe that all these MFers are on steroids? That's what I need to know.
Well, you know what? Actually, another thing I just thought of too. He did go through his test cut for welterweight, but are we looking at it wrong? Should we be looking at Nick Diaz as a middleweight?
I would say no, just because in my recollection, he hasn't fought at middleweight ever, right?
What Anderson Silva was.
Oh yeah, that was a middleweight. Yeah, so I mean, you could have him go middleweight. I think he's probably better off for his size to be at welterweight, but you could have him go up to middleweight. But even then, I think that, especially based on his size and experience at the weight class, I'm not sure who you give him then. I think you have less options, because I think the top 15 again just runs through him, and then I think more of the guys that aren't even ranked yet would give him problems just because of size and strength advantage. So I'd prefer to see him at a middle or welterweight. I also didn't think about it, but I would also not mind seeing him against Michel Pereira. I think that'd be a hilarious fight, and that's something that might be able to be stylistically good enough to set up and make it worth Diaz's time, because he could still get paid, and then UFC could push Pereira that way. So. That might be an option, but again, I think 170 has a lot more options for him than 185.
Yeah, good points there. Just thinking, like, 170 is such a sharp thing. You got a guy like, and I'll keep bringing his name up until he gets the title shot. Leon Edwards is on like a 37 fight win streak or whatever it is, and he's not even discussed as a title contender. I'm sure in these UFC offices a lot of times here. So middleweight has always been more of a top-heavy division. It's always been, you've got 5-6 guys who are extraordinarily talented at the top, and then you just kind of got the rest of the guys that fill out the top 15, and then we'll see what happens from there. So it seems, I mean, granted, the middleweight division is a little more stacked now than it historically has been, but that might be the best road to success for him. Still, either way, such an uphill battle for all the time he's had off and what he's done with himself since that time off began.